Welcome to In the Funnel. My name is Mark Cox. In the Funnel is a group of sales coaches and consultants that help B2B sales teams dramatically improve revenue. Clients come to us when revenue growth has stagnated, or their sales team is not meeting expectations, or they need to recalibrate their sales and go-to-market plan for the upcoming year. Our clients have enjoyed tremendous success working within the funnel, and please hear it straight from them by listening to the testimonial section of this website. What they'll tell you is there's two things that make us unique and different in our space. Number one, we have a process and a methodology. First, for understanding your current state, and then second, for building your sales and go-to-market plan for the upcoming year. The second thing that makes us unique and different is that everybody within the funnel has run a material sales organization in their recent past. We're all practitioners. We don't have any theorists or teachers, and what that means is we can get in front of your sales team and run the next sales meeting, or join them on their next sales call to close your next large prospect. All of us have a passion for professional, disciplined, process-driven sales, and we'd be delighted to talk to you if you're looking to grow revenue for your company. Please feel free to reach out to us through this website at info@inthefunnel.com or by telephone. Thanks for taking the time to watch this.
I wrote an article once, and people can look it up. It's in Rotman magazine called The Power of Happiness. And in the article, I posit that people are happy. Yes, the three things to do on the basis of three things: that they're a valued member of a community. That's one. Two, that they value. And three, is valued by people outside the community. That's what makes people happy. So a job of any leader is to make sure each member of their community feels that they're valued by that community. You got to make that community worth them thinking highly of. And you have to make sure people outside know about you so that they can value you as well. If you do those three things, you'll have happy people. If you don't, you'll have lots of turnover, and you'll have to keep on getting new people to make unhappy and have them leave too. And so that's that. And none of those things has got monetary compensation written all over it.
Hey team, what a show we've got for you today. And I must say that this podcast is slowly becoming one of the joys of my professional career. And you're one of the main reasons for that. So thank you for listening. The other main reason for that is simply the caliber of people I get to meet because of this podcast. And today is a spectacular example of that, because today I'm speaking with Roger Martin. And you'll know Roger. Roger was named the world's #1 management thinker by Thinkers 50 back in 2017. He's a trusted strategic advisor to the CEOs of some of the largest companies in the world, including Procter Gamble, Lego, and Ford. He's also the former dean of the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto. He played that role between 1998 and 2013. And he's authored 13 books. So you'll know many of his books, including When More Is Not Better, Creating Great Choices, Getting Beyond Better, and Playing to Win, which was written with A.G. Lafley. That book, by the way, won the best book of 2012-13 by Thinkers 50. Today, we're talking about his newest book, A New Way to Think. And I love this book. From the cover, Roger noted that almost every executive he talked to had a model or a framework or a way of thinking that guided their strategy and activities. But these models tended to become automatic, so much so that when one didn't work, the typical response was to apply it again and again with greater enthusiasm. So the idea of the book is identifying some classic models associated with 14 different topics in business, and then thinking about a more effective way, different model for that particular topic. And we just have a great conversation today about some of those 14, including a really interesting conversation about incentive compensation in professional sales. We start today's conversation with a real straight talk from Roger on, the role of sales in academia. So why isn't professional sales taught at the MBA level or the business school level, even the BA level? It's very interesting to get to the root cause of it. It's the first time I've ever heard the truth about why it's not taught. And you're gonna hear that about 10 minutes in. We have a great conversation on a number of different fronts today. I really enjoyed today's conversation. I'm quite sure you are going to as well. And if you enjoyed today's podcast, team, as always, please like and subscribe to the Selling Well podcast. And frankly, tell your friends. Folks, here's Roger Martin. Hello, Roger. What a pleasure meeting you today. And thank you so much for joining the Selling Well.
Hey, it's my pleasure, Mark. Thank you for having me.
So Roger, where are you based out of today? Where are we catching you today?
You're catching me in Honolulu, Hawaii. So we have a second home here and spend a couple months a year here. This is where I attempt to do big chunks of writing.
Oh, wonderful. And what are you writing about currently, if you're allowed to share that?
Well, I'm just sort of putting together the thoughts for my next book. And yeah, you're the first person I will have talked to publicly about, but I want to write it on the challenge of the modern large company, which in many industries you've got to grow large. Not all, but lots of industries you've got to grow large to be sustainable and relevant. But the consequence of that is, unless you're super careful and super attentive about it, people in the company, your employees, will feel tiny and insignificant. So I want to write a book about the companies and the executives who sort of figured out you've got to make sure people still feel significant and not tiny. They feel big, even in a big company. Because I think it's a modern dilemma, and I think it starts to happen sooner than people think. I think a lot of medium-sized companies, they may have 500 people, and we know after you get to 75, right, people after that, it becomes harder and harder to make everybody feel part of the group, etc. So it's in some sense triggered by the global behemoths. Where the problem is at its most extreme, but I think it applies more broadly to business. So there you have it. You have the scoop. That is what I'm planning to write my next book on.
Well, folks, you heard it here first. So we're doing nothing if not newsbreakers here at the Selling Well. And so, Roger, you were professor running the Rotman School of Management at U of T from 98 to 2013. And we've had a number of folks on the podcast here, including folks like Philip Squire and others, and Frank Cespedes from Harvard, talking about elevating sales as a profession, this lifelong journey.
Yes.
And can you?
And I have very pointed things. I have very pointed things to say about this, my friend.
Please.
Well,
we love pointed things.
So the North American MBA apparatus is the biggest graduate apparatus in the educational apparatus in the world. Spews out. Last time I checked, and the numbers may be new, around 170,000 MBAs a year. It is almost a quarter of all graduate students in the world, and they go out to business, where if you do not have customers who buy stuff from you, who willingly take money out of their pockets and give it to you, you don't have a business.
Right.
How is it that there are probably a dozen courses on sales in that entire universe of 1,000 business schools spewing out 170,000 students? It's insanity. Is that pointed enough for you? It's insanity. Well, I don't get it. And I do get it. Having lived inside the beast for 15 years, 21 years actually, but 15, as you pointed out, as dean, it's generally speaking considered beneath business school professors, which in and of itself is insanity. And there's another there's a chicken and egg thing. It turns out that new fields really take a long time to develop. So you know probably from knowing about me, but that my sort of native field is strategy.
Yes.
The strategy had its, in my view, sort of official birth with the founding of Boston Consulting Group by Bruce Henderson in 1963. I attended Harvard Business School between 79 and 81.
Okay. And
there was exactly one strategy course at Harvard Business School considered a great leader in strategy. Like people would say, well, they a strategy, like as Bruce Henderson used to hang out at the Harvard Business School, Mike Porter, blah, 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 blah. So there was one elective, second-year elective in strategy. That's 18 years after Bruce Henderson created an industry and then spun off, what partners spun off to create BCG in 1973. It was a growing, thriving industry, and there was one second-year elective. So the problem with new fields in the business school world is that there's this chicken and egg thing, which is to have professors who want to dedicate their life to a field, there have to be journals, refereed journals, official refereed journals on the subject to publish their articles. If there aren't, professors working in that field won't get tenure and they will disappear after 5 to 7 years. Yeah. And so what anybody practically in a business school would tell you is, hey, Mark, like, I like sales. I'd be game to do work in sales, but if I did, I'd never get tenure because there are no journals. There are journals of marketing. There's econometric marketing journals. There's behavioral marketing journals. Blah blah blah. All of those things, and I can get my articles published there. And then when I come up for tenure, they say, you've had enough publications. We'll give you tenure and a job for life. And if I don't, if I come and have a bunch of articles that have been rejected by all the journals that are even close to sales, and then they'll say, sorry, Roger, you suck, and go try and find another job with on your resume the fact that you didn't get tenure at whatever at the Rotman school. So It really takes a long time for these things to develop. Design would be another field, right? Like students are incredibly interested in design. Big companies like Intuit and IBM and whatever, and GE are gaga over design, trying to hire as many designers as possible. But you can't get tenure at a North American business school of any consequence by working on design stuff, because there are no business journals that specialize in or even are interested in articles on it. So last time I checked, in total, there are tens of thousands of professors in US business schools or North American business schools. And the last time I checked, there were exactly 5 working in tenure stream professors working in the field of design in business. 5. And all of them are over 65. They all or people who did something else. I'm one of them, but I'm now a retired professor. Gene Liedtke at Dart is another one. Buchanan at Case Western is one of them, but he's in his 70s and got tenure long before he was and in a design school, and then he became a god and got tenure. So for people who think it's stupid that business schools don't have a required first-year course and numerous second-year electives in sales, which they should, they are correct. It is stupid, but it is a problem of stupidity that is hard to overcome. Therefore, there is a multi-billion-dollar, I don't know how big the sales training industry is, but it could be as big as the MBA industry. I'm not sure, but there are so many, and you would know it. And you could argue, Mark, that you're in part in the sales training writ large. You're helping people with
We are
becoming better selling.
We are.
So you're writ large part of that educational industry. It's just outside the formal educational world, and so literally it's just silly. It's silliness, and that's as clear and simple as I can be about it.
Now we're into it. Well, you're absolutely right. I completely agree, Roger. The industry, by the way, is a $70 billion industry.
Okay.
So the sales training industry
bigger
in the US is a $70 billion industry that's come out of the fact that this is a core business discipline typically not taught at the educational level in an MBA class.
Yeah. And I bet, Mark, I've never added it up. It would be interesting to know, but like Harvard Business School, which does way more, well, it is got a budget last time I checked of about 700 million, and it's the biggest business school, and only probably a quarter of that is the MBA program. It's selling cases and all the executive education, and so let's just say that the MBA is 150 to 200 million there, and only Wharton and a very few are the same size or up to half the size. I bet if we did the numbers, it would be a $15 billion industry, maybe. And so you'd be talking about an industry 5 times as big as the whole industry, that business schools would have a huge leg up. They can give you a degree about it. You can be an MBA specializing in sales all over your degree at a prestigious business school. They should be able to outcompete those companies, but they don't even try. 70 billion, that's cool. I did not know that statistics, and I should try and figure out what the revenues of MBA programs in America are. That would be interesting.
And I used to know the specific stats. Roger, I'm afraid of throwing stats out with someone like you in case they're slightly wrong. But I believe the last time I looked at this, was I thought there were over 80% of, I thought when I had done some research, there was around 465 schools in the US where you could get a graduate degree in business or an MBA. It was around that number.
I think it's up to 700 or 800 now.
Okay. So this would have been some time ago.
Yeah.
And there was some publication, I think it had been published by the Challey Group, but it was research that was used for the base of a book called The Challenger Stale with Matt Dix and a guy named Brent Adamson. But they'd said that 80% of those schools don't even teach a single course.
Yeah.
And then I think there were only 16 schools where you could get a graduate degree in business and sales.
Oh, okay. For whatever it's worth, Mark, that's more optimistic than I thought. I thought the answer would be 0 on the second question and 5%, not 20% on the first question. So maybe there's more of a ray of hope than I might have thought. That's interesting.
Well, what's so interesting to me, Roger, I'd never heard it explained this way. But I did an executive MBA at a good Canadian university. I went to, Ivy, let's call it 15 years ago.
Great Canadian university.
Yeah. And I was so perplexed. Because I was in sales at the time.
Okay.
And so as an executive MBA, literally, and not no critique to that program whatsoever, which was great. Sales was literally a chapter in the marketing textbook.
Yeah. Yep.
And I used to have conversations.
I would like to say Rotman was way, way better on that front than Ivy. Not true. And I have high respect for the EMBA program at Rotman, and it was great, and just like Ivy's, but that's literally par for the course. And in fact, you seem like be like a nerd on this, like I'm a nerd on this. So
I sure am.
But it's so sort of chicken and egg, which is so what they would say, right? The professors at business would say, well, there aren't rigorous, academically tested models that you can teach, right? So in marketing, they'd have a whole bunch of models that would have come out of, had been affirmed. We did study of this and it appeared in Marketing Science, the refereed journal, or Journal of Marketing, or Journal of Consumer Research, and whatever. But again, it's chicken and egg. If there are no journals that can qualify something as academically rigorous model, then they'll say there are no models. What again they would say is, well, yeah, you can get sales guys to come in and give people sort of conventional wisdom about sales, but there isn't anything rigorous. Well, the reason there isn't anything rigorous is because there aren't any refereed journals. So there aren't PhD programs. There aren't professors, junior professors wanting to get tenure writing articles on that. So it just, it just keeps swirling at that level. And I get, like, now that I understand that world, the viewers may or may not know, I was like a business guy, and being a dean was my first academic job.
Of course. I absolutely know.
So I still think like a business guy, but now I understand it more. And it's just one of those things. What I believe will have to happen, right, is, as is the case with design, where design in business becomes a kind of a thing that companies care about and students care about. And then what show up on the scene are people around the fringes of the core. The core of any business school is the tenure stream faculty, which is guarded like Fort Knox. But then around it are a series, and I'm sure you had some of these in EMBA, although you may not have even known which was which, right? Our adjunct professors are often called professors of practice, who are not tenure stream academics. They have no requirement to do research. They teach. And so they're the first people in new fields. So when e-commerce was coming up, you had practitioners teaching it. Kind of when strategy came up, you had practitioners teaching it. Design, you have practitioners teaching it. And sales, my bet is that in those 80% of courses that have sales, or 20% of programs that have sales, I'll bet my bottom dollar that at least 95% of those courses are taught by non-tenure stream professors. In due course, if you have enough of that activity, then some brave junior professor will say, kind of, screw it, I'm gonna try and get articles in. We had one of those in design, a PhD, a Korean guy, fantastic Korean guy. Actually went back to Korea. So his PhD is in marketing, but his specialty was in design. And he actually got a tenure stream position back in a Korean university, like a good top tier Korean university. But you need brave people like that to say, I know I'm on the outside. I know I'm barely going to be accepted. I know many of my articles, when I submit them, people are going to just like write back saying this is stupid, and I'll have to start all over. That'll have to happen for sales. It probably will eventually, but it's a long road.
How interesting, Roger. First of all, thank you for that. I've never heard it explained that way, because you're always looking for this root cause for this problem that seems so obvious that needs fixing. But the fact that there isn't this standard set of, let's call it, operating guidelines for sales that have been tested with academic rigor. That's very interesting to me to start to think about that, to take that one away. But now it starts to make sense. And when you started to explain your history with Harvard as your BA and your MBA from Harvard, the reality of it is the MBA programs out there, for folks like you or me, they haven't been out there really that long. So it hasn't been hundreds of years of MBA programs. It's what would have been 60s, 70s where it really started gaining.
Exactly. It did start 100 years ago. So Harvard Business School opened its doors in the very early 20th century.
Oh, okay.
But it was a a kind of a baby industry until after World War II. If you look at the very historical numbers, they exploded after that to become, rather than a sort of just another relatively small master's program, to this gigantic one. So you're right. It is sort of the last 60 or so years that it's been a real thing. And the same actually holds for undergrad as well. Undergrad goes back farther. The first undergrad degrees were like Wharton and Tuck at Dartmouth were the earliest on the undergrad level. Harvard has got the distinction of being the first graduate program, but undergrad's in the late 1800s. But still, if you look as of World War II, the numbers there were not great, and it took off after World War II, and it had something to do with the war. For what it's worth, it's the view by real war historians is that it's that sort of the business side of the Allied armed forces kind of won the war. It was logistics. They were better able to get logistics, and that was and especially in the war of the Pacific, because that was just incredibly tricky business. And I think there was a greater appreciation that things like operations and logistics and the like were kind of really important, and that helped accentuate it. And Harvard Business School, I don't know if the same was for Ivy, probably not, because the military is just proportionately smaller in Canada than the US. But in my Harvard Business School class, there were a whole mess of military people.
Isn't that interesting?
And my buddy A.G. Lafley, right, went to Harvard Business School out of 5 years.
Procter and Gamble.
But 5 years in the Navy. He literally went to Procter after business school. Before business school, it was 5 years in the Navy. Shel Saunders in my section at business school was a nuclear submarine commander.
Wow.
He didn't like people disagreeing with him very much, from what he was just used to people saying when he says,
"Yes, sir."
How high, sir? So I think that was a time. But you're right. It became a giant industry, a giant educational industry post Second World War.
Well, this conversation, you're right. We are nerds with the gang it in the funnel and the selling well, Roger, because we're on this path of a couple of things, trying to, first of all, improve the performance and professionalism of B2B sales across the board. Yep. And in doing so, actually improving the lives of professional salespeople. So that's kind of where we try and play. And for those playing at home, by the way, A.G. Lafley is a co-author with Roger of the groundbreaking Playing to Win, which is, universally recognized as one of the best books on strategy out there. And when you talked about the MBA and strategy, I'll make a couple of other points that some listeners to the show might remember. Roger, we did have Daniel Pink on the show.
Yeah, he was a great friend of mine. Is he? So I'm sort of boring. He is funny as hell. Don't you? He's hilarious.
You're not boring at all, by the way.
And super smart. So he's a good friend. Yeah.
Well, interesting connection. And the only reason I bring, by the way, he was, wonderful also. You're not boring, one eye will believe me. We're gonna have a wonderful conversation today. But at the end, one of the things I liked about, the interview or the discussion with him so much was a groundbreaking book for me was To Sell as Human. Yeah. Given what I'd chosen to do with my life. Yep. And I said, hey, Daniel, why would you write this book? You don't have a background in sales. You're not really that big an academic. What caused you to write this book? And he came back and he said, there was this huge disconnect, Mark, between everybody I met in professional sales who were, and with all due humility, were saying some of the smartest, most innovative, problem-solving, creative people in business. But there was this 40-year-old stereotype of what I would have thought of salespeople, and I just couldn't reconcile the two. And it triggered him to write To Sell as Human. Which is
another great book. He's written many great books, but that is certainly a great book.
And then we always love the quote going back to strategy of the first time I went to college and university, I was introduced to beer. And so became very familiar with every type of beer under the sun, including the Boston Brewing Company's Sam Adams.
Yes.
And Jim Koch is famous for saying, he was also at Harvard and then he got pulled into BCG in the early days.
Yeah.
But he is very famous of saying once he decided to become an entrepreneur and he wanted to, start a brewing company, he found that sales was far more immediately challenging than anything he had done for BCG.
Yeah.
And I always joke that, no one in the world ever had to sell me a beer back in the day. I just bought beers. So, there's this tie to the fact that this is a profession. There are a set of operating guidelines and procedures that elevate it. It doesn't get taught. So it's kind of the Wild West.
Yeah.
And as a result of which, most of the organizations that listen to a podcast like this, the vast majority of them always feel like they're struggling on the sales front.
Yeah.
They always feel.
And it's interesting. Two things I would say. One is, and that plays right to what you go at, which is B2B sales. Even though everybody said, well, beer, that's a consumer product, it's B2C. No, with the distribution system for beer, oh boy, is it, if you're not selling to bars and doing that well, if you're not selling to local distributors, you don't have a beer company. So it's one of these ones that's intensively both B2B and B2C sales. But if you don't do the B2B, you don't have a B2C.
Right.
The other thing I'd say is, because thank you, you're a fan of my books. The book that I would point out to salespeople that I think is the most relevant to them is actually The Opposable Mind. And let me explain why. So that for the listeners who don't know is a book on something I call integrative thinking, which is a book that says, hey, when you think you're faced with an either or choice rather than choosing one or the other, it is your job to come up with an integrative solution that takes aspects of each and combines it for a better result. And most managerial people simply do not engage in that. They are taught, and they're taught at business school, well, you have to make choices. You got to be a tough guy or a tough gal to make those tough choices. And integrative thinking says, no, the really hard thing to do is to come up with a better solution. In my view, every time a salesperson makes a sales call, they have an integrative problem on their hands, right? The customer would like to buy the most customized thing possible at the lowest price. The salesperson would like to sell the most generic thing that they don't have to add cost by customizing at the highest price. Voila, you have an either or. And crummy salespeople, right, just say it's going to be this generic thing at this price, this generic thing at this price. Come on, you want it, right? And they sell some, they bowl over some people, but they would, they have a 20% hit, just say for sake of argument, 20% hit rate. The finest salespeople are the ones that listen really carefully to the client, the customer, and sort of say, well, how about this way of getting something that works for both of us, right? And have a much higher hit rate, right? And the crummy salesman goes back to headquarters and says, we're trying to sell it for too much. We're not doing the things that customers want. And the great sales people are like, hey man, had another good month. And so I would argue that if there's one book a person in sales, and especially B2B sales where there's a lot more individual in person, B2C is often a little more distant, and it's customers, not the customer sitting in front of me. So if you're into B2B sales, that is the book that I would recommend above all others. Although we did then, a colleague of mine, Jennifer Riel, and I wrote, if you like that, then there's a more tactical how-to book called Creating Great Choices that we wrote. But think of so I would recommend that to them, to anybody who's in B2B sales and wants to get better. Read that book with an eye to saying, I have this integrative challenge every time I go out and sell. How can I use the tools in the book to be better at creating these proverbial third way win-wins with customer? It would be more valuable than either a new way to think or playing to win, for what it's worth.
Thank you, by the way. So we'll absolutely get, team, we've got that in the show notes for today. So you can go and click on the link to get that book. And by the way, I will also add, I also think good salespeople are also intellectually curious about what's happening in business. So in order to actually sell anything, we have to solve a problem for a client or a prospect.
Yep.
And one of the things that I just loved, I did love a new way to think. And I do think that folks listening today should pick up this book. And we're going to talk about this book and a little bit of Playing to Win, but let's just give the highest level view on the book. You know, from the inside, I think from the inside, or the first couple of chapters, Roger, you notice that almost every executive you talked to had a model or a framework or a way of thinking that guided their strategy and activities. But these models tended to become automatic so much that when one didn't work, the typical response was just apply it again and again with greater enthusiasm.
Yes.
And it's just such a beautifully laid out book where you take on 14 of these, let's call it these traditional models or mindsets or structures. Mm-hmm. And it's the old way and then thinking about the new way of thinking. And by the way, if we just took that paragraph and applied it to professional sales, hey, something's not working, just do more of it.
Yeah,
that is the crux of the issue in professional sales today.
Yeah, the client isn't buying, so push them harder. Push them harder. Say it again. Right. I
talk more.
Talk exactly. Talk more. Don't let them talk, because if they talk, they may then sort of get control of this conversation, and that would be terrible. I must be in charge, and if I push hard enough, I'll get this. I see it all the time, and before coming to become the dean of the Rotman School, I was one of the 4 people running this big global consulting firm, and one of these things, which is the same for sales, right, is in general, like directors had to sell, right? Mm-hmm. Before that, they were essentially, kind of analytical problem solvers. Right. They'd structure the work and they were planning work and whatever, but then they had to sell, and it was literally this kind of mysterious thing, right? You didn't know whether you'd end your career the highest you'd be as a case team leader, and you'd head off. We didn't have up or out, but you'd head off because you'd get better opportunities, or be a director. And the thing that was required to be a director and become a shareholder of the company, blah blah blah, all that stuff, and the biggest financial rewards was, could you sell or not? Right. And it was considered the sort of the dark art, this mysterious thing. Some could and some couldn't. And the very interesting thing for me to watch was all the way up to that level. You sort of were focused on being persuasive about your idea. So I've done the analysis, and therefore you client should do X. And so advocating your point of view, advocating your ideas was the thing you got practice doing. When it comes to selling a client, especially something like high-end strategy consulting services, it's an abstract product. It's trust based. It's not unlike kind of deciding to go with this heart surgeon versus that to fix your heart. It's that critical stuff. Listening, and more listening is key. But everything up to that point did not prepare them to to listen, and that's why many of the very, very smartest, the best performing CTLs completely washed out. And we were a young company, probably, right? If we were young punks consulting is what I call this. If we had more experience, we would have turned probably to the sales kind of training industry to say, hey, this industry is not so like completely unusual that none of the usual rules of sales apply here. Oh yeah, no, we're not selling soap here. We would have woken up, smelled the coffee, and said, no, there are ways to do this better, and would have transitioned more people from that second highest level, if you will, to the highest level. And how many people we transitioned from that second to the highest was the rate limiting step in the growth of monitor company. Full stop. We could hire all sorts of case team members. We could get them up to case team leaders, directors. Sometimes not. Who knows?
Well, it's an interesting issue even today, Roger. And so just on the listening front, we have a friend of the show named Oscar Trimboli, who's written a couple of great books on listening. And the number that I hope everybody listening here today remembers is 900, 400, 125. So most of us speak at about 125 words a minute.
Okay.
But we think at 900 words per minute. So most of the time, we're not getting it all out.
Interesting.
But people won't allow for that pregnant pause to allow the person to finish their thought.
Yes.
And the reason they don't is we listen at 400 words a minute.
Oh, interesting. Think 900, listen 400, and talk 125.
Right.
Interesting. That's fascinating. I buy it, and it jives completely with what my diagnosis is of the terrible twos. So I'll use that framework to do it, which is that when you're two, your vocalization skills are minimal, but I believe your thinking skills are pretty good. So I wouldn't be surprised if a 2-year-old, maybe they're not 900, but they're, let's just say 600. But rather than 125, they are at 7 or something like that. And I've always believed that 2-year-olds get massively annoyed and frustrated and inconsolable because they cannot articulate what they're thinking, and so they're thinking these things, and there's nothing they can say. And I think the parents who really slow down, so that this is what resonated immediately when you said that, the parents, I think, who slow it down to a crawl do best with the terrible twos, because the words will eventually get out there, but not if you layer, you're being, Mark, you're being bad, stop stomping your feet. That's continuing the rolling more thinking and creating a greater deficit between what's in the poor little 2-year-old's mind and what they can vocalize. Anyway, who knows? But
it would certainly make sense. And I, the other thing I wanted to kind of unpack a little bit, where you're talking about, with monitors, strategic consulting, this concept of getting from the one level to that next level was all about generating revenue. And of course, as you know, 100 times better than me, Roger, it's still the case today in most professional services firms, whether it's a law firm or a consulting firm, it's all the same thing today.
Yep.
But the reality of it is, organizations like us, every once in a while, some of these very senior people from these firms come to us and say, we have to figure out how you could come in and help some of our partners, but we can't call it selling.
Oh, really?
So there's such an aversion with the stereotype or the discipline that they say, Mark, do you have some other way of packaging this up so you don't call it sales? And I come back and go, I run a company called Into Funnel Sales Coaching. We have a Selling Well podcast. There's no running away from the term.
Yeah.
We have to address the fact that pitching or cajoling was never selling.
Yeah.
If you were doing big enterprise software deals for multi-hundreds of millions of dollars, you weren't forcing that in anywhere.
Right.
You're taking a consulting approach of understanding
Yep.
the outcomes of the business and so forth. So,
Or you're never going to get anywhere if you don't do that. Yeah.
No, but let's circle back, Roger, because by the way, I absolutely found a new way to think so compelling. Because as you aptly point out in the book, the challenge with many of us, and maybe even us at the end of the funnel, we have these models and methodologies. We get in and we look at an organization we're working with, and we just assume they're not executing the existing model well.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of maybe trying the harder work, which is much more painful to figure out, is there a new way of looking at this? Is there a new model?
Yeah.
And you address this beautifully laid out with these 14 different areas: competition, stakeholders, and customers. Then you think about how companies make choices with strategy or choices, and then how we structure work with culture, knowledge work, and corporate functions. And then look to key activities: planning, execution, talent, innovation, capital investment, and M&A. How interesting that second last one, capital investment, particularly really over the last 5 years, but in the last 18 months, the capital investment.
Yes.
But let's have maybe, Roger, if you wouldn't mind, let's pick one or two of these and talk about,
Sure.
The kind of classic model, and then, where we are today. And one of the ones that, jumps out to me right off the top is talent.
Yes.
Let's talk about, sorry, a little bit of noise here. Let's talk about talent. And you say, as the classic model, compensation, especially performance-based compensation, is the most critical element in attracting and retaining talent. That might have been the classic model.
Oh.
Let's talk about a new way of looking at that. What's the new way of thinking of that?
Well, it's that the person, what matters most to the person is feeling special, feeling valued as an individual, feeling that their needs are thought of individually, that their path forward isn't blocked. That's important, and that they're patted on the back kind of enough. Often high performers, the view is it's obvious to them that they're doing great. They don't get patted on the back. They're being paid a lot. They're getting all sorts of glory. They need to be patted on the back. So it's generally under the category of being made to feel special, not more special than they are, but kind of everybody is special, kind of in their own way. And and you've got to signal that, and it's a place where, and this I'd be interested in, just in in having an honest conversation about this, Mark, because you may tell me I'm just totally wrong on this, and as an expert, I'll accept that. But in my view, the entire sales world does itself a dysfunction by being as incentive compensation oriented as it is. And I know lots and lots of people in sales just say, well, you're just wrong, Roger. It's super important to be compensated for selling, and you've got to give people sales incentives and the like. And of course, in certain industries, things become so established, it just is hard to do anything differently. But for me, I think it makes salespeople feel less special, because dollars or whatever the currency is, pounds or lira or whatever currency you're working on, is the most fungible thing possible. It is not at all individualized. A dollar in your hand is the same as a dollar in my hand. It's being rewarded in the most kind of generic sort of way. Whereas praise, right, Mark, if I say to you after we finish this conversation, we have a little conversation, I say, hey, Mark, you did a really good job of conducting that. I really appreciate that. That's not fungible, right? That's not just some generic thing. Like if instead I said, kind of, Mark, I'm going to send you $100 check because you did a good job, right? That turns something that's really designed specifically for you. And if you say, well, Roger, what do you think I did so well? And I say, I don't know, I was just saying that, right? Then it becomes not special. But if I say, well, the way you conducted it, the flow and the ebbs, all were really calm, and I'm sure the listeners kind of really enjoyed it. And when I think the listeners are enjoying it, I enjoy it. Then you'd say, wow, right? That's about me. That's affirming something I've worked long and hard to be good at, and you'll feel special. That's the currency that I would rather see people apply than the currency of generic bucks. And I just think it's the problem that's created in sales is, if I give them a good incentive program, that's all I got to do. Just send them out, and if they sell more, I pay them more, and I'm done, right? As opposed to, I think really carefully about their progress. Do they want to eventually go into management? How would I, or even sales management or management in general? But either am I making sure that they don't feel blocked, that they just got another higher quota, so they can't do those other training courses that they were planning to do, and whatever. And when I give them their compensation, incentive compensation check based on meeting their quotas at the end of the year, that's enough of a pat on the back. I don't have to do anything. So I think that salespeople tend to be impoverished in terms of the other things that matter. Their ideas being taken into account, number one. Number two, their path not blocked, but kind of aided. And them getting pats on the back, and part of that to me is because I think this is my hypothesis. So I'm testing this all with you, Mark, because you can say I'm
sure. Yeah, I've got lots of thoughts.
This overwhelmingness of incentive compensation causes those things to not be done as well as let's just go over to the marketing function or the operations function. They would get more of those three things, in part because they get less in general of monetary incentive compensation. Your thoughts? Now I'm interviewing you.
Oh, there we go. Well, thanks, Roger. Well, first of all, just in terms of the recognition, you are absolutely right. And again, I don't have the empirical evidence of having surveyed, 30,000, or 3,000 sales leaders across Canada, but I often do look at the research done by other people.
Mm-hmm.
And it always comes back in my personal experience is, you're absolutely right. Recognition matters most. Now, when salespeople are interviewing for new roles, they don't think the recognition matters most. So they definitely negotiate hard on compensation and upside and all of those types of things. But I am amazed at how, if it isn't handled well, no matter what the compensation is, somebody's going to be extraordinarily unhappy or mildly disengaged or actively disengaged on the team. I think in larger organizations, this happens a lot with enterprise sales organizations. I think you have a bunch of folks in there who are completely mercenary.
Yes. And
they're not putting the client first. And the insane cadence to hit quarterly numbers means they either do a deal or they may not be employed by that firm.
Yep.
And so I think it absolutely drives the wrong behaviors. And, you can see people, people who maybe had that tendency just behave badly. We've all seen that. So I completely agree with you, Roger, that it is the recognition that makes the most impact on an employee. They don't always know it until they're in the role, and you can see it when you're managing. And I think we have to be cognizant of that. An extra bit of money does not make up for recognition. And this is why, by the way, things like let's call it the club, they call it club.
Yes.
And hey, I've hit my quota for the year. And part of it is, hey, I'm telling the rest of the company I've hit my quota for the year. So we're off to the Bahamas.
Yeah.
And then we get lots of treats. Or even if it's something as simple as, quarterly or annual sales recognition of someone hitting their targets, they actually care about that piece of plastic or that trophy.
Yes.
And it ends up being on their desk.
Yep, absolutely.
And it was probably 1/1000th of the cost, with the bonus they got.
Yes.
In terms of value. So I think you're absolutely right. And I think we as leaders in businesses, I don't want people who are completely money motivated.
Yeah.
Any more than on.
Yeah. No, please go ahead.
Any more than on a hockey team, I don't want someone out there who's playing only for their own personal stats.
Yeah. Yeah.
If they get a hat trick and we lose, that doesn't help me.
And that's, I got to say, it makes me nervous about these bonuses. They're more prevalent in the NFL, National Football League, than the other sports thus far. But it's this many sacks or this many passes or completions or touchdown passes or the like. Because I just don't think that's really how people are motivated, and people underestimate the value. I like your 1/1000th thing. So let me tell you a little story about incentive compensation.
Please.
Or what kind of thing provides an incentive? So when I got to Rotman, as you probably know, Rotman was not a very well-performing school, and we didn't have many professors that had sort of international reputations. One of the few that we had came into my office. I started September 1998. This was probably November 1998 to say he'd been made an offer at a prestigious U.S. university, not Harvard or Stanford, but next tier, very good university. And the pay was about $80,000 a year more than what he was making here. And he said, but I like this, and if you can match it, then I will stay. And so, unfortunately, we were a crummy performing school with a deficit, terrible economics. And I said to the professor, well, listen, here's the deal. We are going to turn this place around, and we're going to make it a great business school. We're going to make it a business school that's world renowned, etc., so that all you and your fellow professors and the new ones we hire will all be proud to be part of it. But that's going to take time. One of the things we don't have, and and everybody else knows, is we don't have junior faculty members, because we've been paying too low salaries for junior faculty members. Our senior faculty who have established families in Toronto there's some stickiness there, but these junior faculty members are like laugh at our offers. We've got to hire junior faculty members to grow them into senior faculty members, and you want to have that and whatever. If I pay you the $80,000,
right,
and you're worth it, yeah, you're worth it, no question. I'll not be able to hire nearly as many junior faculty members as fast. And so here's the deal, Gary. I can pay you it now, or I can promise that within 5 years I'll get you to that level. And if I have to pay it to you now, that'll be fine. I'll keep on treating you the same. But I have a list in my own head that's for my own personal consumption only. I'm never going to share who's on that list to anybody else, and I still haven't, 21 years after this conversation. And there's going to be a list of the professors who made my job of making this a great business school harder, and a list of professors who made my job easier. if you make me pay you that now, you'll be on the make it harder list, but nobody's going to know. I ain't telling anybody. Ain't naming names. And if you wait for the 5 years, I promise you'll get your money. You wait for the 5 years, you'll be on the made my job easier list. Think about that. So that is about, because 5 years to 8, let's just call it at least, I would have ramped them up, but let's say at least $250,000.
Yeah.
$250,000 price to be on one list in one man's head that is never going to be revealed to anybody. You'd say that's kind of worthless, right? That's like nothing.
I wouldn't say it's worthless. No.
No, well, but simply because you're smart. But many people would say that is worthless. It's just an imaginary list in one man's mind. You got to be kidding me. Comes back a week later and say, I want to be on the second list, Roger.
What a great approach, Roger. Wow.
And he was a stunningly successful professor there, and he puffed his chest up, always in some sense walking around knowing that he knew himself. He was a professor who was helping all of us, wasn't just me, all of us, make this a great school. So for those who say, right, no, without the money, it's got to be money and recognition. We had no money, so we couldn't give money and recognition. I used recognition for it, and I believe that is human nature. And I wrote an article once. And then I'll stop. I wrote an article once, and people can look it up. It's in Rotman magazine, called "The Power of Happiness." And in the article, I posit that people are happy. Yes, the three things to do on the basis of three things: that they're a valued member of a community. That's one. 2, that they value, and 3 is valued by people outside the community. That's what makes people happy. So a job of any leader is to make sure each member of their community feels that they're valued by that community. You got to make that community worth them thinking highly of. And you have to make sure people outside know about you so that they can value you as well. If you do those 3 things, you'll have happy people. If you don't, you'll have lots of turnover, and you'll have to keep on getting new people to make unhappy and have them leave too. And so that's that. And none of those things has got monetary compensation written all over it.
I am so glad the conversation accidentally went down this path. So gang, we're going to have to link to that HBR. Was it? Oh, sorry. It was a
Rotman magazine
article. What a huge takeaway for everybody listening to this today. And when we talk about this compensation, and I'm sure you've done this, Roger, I'm quite sure I've made more career mistakes than you have. However,
I've probably made more.
Well, sometime over a nice cappuccino, we can share those stories. But the shortest tenure I ever had was in far and away the highest paying job on paper that I ever stepped into.
Yes.
And just stepped in and said, as soon as you decide, I don't like this environment, particularly as a leader.
Yeah.
I just turned around and went, I just made a mistake. It doesn't matter what the money is.
Yeah.
And I could see in this particular environment, again, there were a bunch of mercenaries who had stepped into kind of the same thing, but they were saying, well, I'm sticking around, I'm a mercenary, I've got to just last. And
yeah,
I can't operate like that. It doesn't work that way for me. I'm either in 100% or I am out, but I'm not going to waste anybody's time. So I just turn around and walk right back out.
Yeah.
And so yeah, once you get to a certain stage of life, I think a lot of the folks listening to this podcast, they haven't learned that lesson yet.
Yeah.
But to be part of a great company with a great culture, and, culture is another one where we talk about a classic model and the new model in the new book. But to be part of a great culture,
yeah,
we all would like lots of compensation, but that recognition is magnificent. And it's funny, for one of the most significant transactions that I was ever involved in, which had a very wonderful kind of bonus, associated with it. But it all comes and goes.
Yeah.
What I kept was a note from the CEO at that time.
Oh, wow. Saying, great job, Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as part of the parcel of passing along, there was this personal note and some thoughts down on the page. I have that to this day, because that's the thing that mattered. That's what really put my win in sales. The other thing was always going to be taken care of.
Yeah. And what's the monetary value of that? A Zippo, like it's a piece of paper with words on it, but it's in some sense kind of has infinite value. Yeah, no, the other thing to keep in mind, just doling out advice on this, is people should also recognize, people in leadership roles should also recognize that monetary compensation has very different values to people at very different times.
Yes.
Like if the baby is coming and you've got to put an addition on the back to have the bedroom necessary for the baby, it's going to matter. But if you're probably in your position, Mark, you've had some catalytic events where, monetary catalytic events where you've got a stack of dough salted away, then it isn't. And I think a smart manager recognizes that. And I always tried to do that, when I was sort of managerially kind of running monitor company, is just to have a conversation about it. Because sometimes I'd say, listen, if you need money right now, I care about you, the firm cares about you, we can, but I can't get you on a path where if we give you some extra this year because you've got this thing, that you're then on a path where the next year, unless I give you another big increment like this of last year, when part of this increment is not performance-based, it's just kind of special for you, then this is a complete failure, because then you're going to be crying in your soup in my office and quitting. But if we can have this agreement that says, we just want to recognize that you need something extra, and there's going to be give and take. I might need that money for somebody else sometime. If we can have that agreement, okay. I think that nursed people through kind of economic periods. But if you just treated a dollar as a dollar through time for an individual person, it's fungible across people. But for each person, vis-a-vis time, dollars are worth different things, and thinking about compensation in that way. And again, this reinforces my point on specialness. That person felt special that I was willing to have that conversation and do something like that for them. They felt understood as an individual, appreciated and valued as an individual, and that goes a long way.
Well, Roger, that person felt special. I feel absolutely privileged to have had this conversation and get this opportunity to meet you.
Well,
so
thank you.
Thank you so much for joining the podcast.
It's my pleasure, and I will say it on the podcast. Your willingness to go in various directions as the conversation flows is what, in my experience of having done hundreds and hundreds of these now, is what makes the difference between a great podcast and a formulaic one that feels like you had 10 questions and you're going to ask them whatever the hell happens. You're going to ask them. So I really enjoyed this, and it was my pleasure and my privilege, and keep up the good work.
Oh, thank you so much, Roger. That's so kind of you to share that. Team, thank you so much for joining today's podcast. And as you know, our goal is to share some strategies, processes, best practices, leading thinking to help you run better businesses today. And we really want to improve the lives of everybody listening to this podcast. Subject to Roger's wonderful comments, I know we can improve this, and we want to hear from you. So if you like today's podcast, please like and subscribe to the Selling Well podcast. And if you have some constructive criticism as to how we might improve this podcast for you, the listener, please let me know. My personal email is markcox@inthefunnel.com, markcox@inthefunnel.com, and we love constructive criticism. Until then, thank you for joining today, and we'll see you next time on The Selling Well.